Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Cup of Jonah. So, this morning, of course, we continue on our journey through Summa Contra Gentiles. About 2/3 of the way through, almost. And today we look at how God understands all things together. So, we went through who God was, whether he existed, how he was related to his creation. Is he the form of it? Is there potency in him? Excuse me. Then we established that he's an intellect, he's a good, he's the highest good, he's an intellect. And then we started exploring what he knows. As an intellect, there has to be some intellectual knowledge. And obviously, we know that he somehow knows all things. We can infer that just even without the philosophy and even without the superstructured reasoning. We know that instinctively, right? Because if he's managing all of creation and if he's the cause of all of creation, then there has to be some kind of awareness there. And for those of us who've had an experience of God in some way, we know that he knows us, right? So the last couple days we went through excuse me, I don't know what's going on with my throat this morning. We went through how he knows things. If he knows himself and if he knows all things, how can he know a multitude? How can he? And so we just kind of looked at the difference between the human intellect and the complexity. And we're going to get down into that nuance, a little bit more nuanced. So today we're going to talk about how he understands all things together. So we're going to look at how he understands all things together. And then we're going to look at, remember, one of the ways that we're trying to understand God is by way of remotion, by way of removing the imperfections in the things that we see and understand. One of those things, and actually really the only frame of reference that we have for intellects are our own, because we don't see intellects anywhere else in nature. Obviously, angels and demons, they're intellectual beings, but we don't really have knowledge of them in the same way that we have knowledge of ourselves and of the rest of the created world, because all of our knowledge comes to us through our senses, so we can only understand and infer things that angels can and cannot do by what we witness that they do and don't do. And through philosophy, as we'll see in book 2, he'll actually dig into what they are and are not capable of, if I remember correctly. He'll go through what exactly as purely intellectual creatures, how they do anything they do, what are their limits, what are their powers, especially what can they do that we can't, what can they do that surpasses our abilities. So that'll be very interesting. In the meantime, we understand all things separately. we have a different idea of dog and of tree and of animal and of rational. Being inferior intellects as we are, we understand ideas through a multitude of ideas. We understand all that we know through a multitude of ideas. The angelic beings understand all of creation through much fewer ideas, and then God through a single idea. And the higher up, Thomas in his Summa Theologica says, the higher up you go in the hierarchy of angels, the more perfect the angel is, the more powerful the angel's intellect, and therefore the more it understands all of creation with fewer concepts, with fewer ideas, which is really fascinating. And we see this actually, an analogy to that we see in the world, because, I'm sure you've had the experience where someone tells you something or tries to explain something to you and they made it sound so much more complicated than it was before. And then someone comes along and makes it all seem so simple. They explain the whole complicated thing very, very simply. That's an intelligent mind that can teach a complex concept or system of concepts, or a concept set of ideas very simply. Hope I didn't complicate that for you. All right. And bear with me with my throat. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what's going on. I think it's just, I don't know. morning stuff. Oh, but don't forget, of course, check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com, and please do share if you enjoy Cup of Jonah. Cheers. Okay. That God understands all things together. From this, it is further apparent that God understands all things together. Our intellect cannot understand in act many things together. The reason is that since the intellect in act is its object in act, if the intellect did understand many things together, it would follow that the intellect would be at one and the same time many things according to one genus, which is impossible. I say according to one genus because nothing prevents the same object from being informed by diverse forms of diverse genera, just as the same body is figured and colored. Now, the intelligible species by which the intellect is formed so as to be the objects that are understood in act all belong to one genus, for they have one manner of being in the order of the order of intelligible being, even though the things whose species they are do not have one manner of being. So just to take a step back a second and explain this concept that he's laying out for the intellect. So, in Aristotle's understanding of the mind, which I think is an accurate one, you have the active intellect, which is a participation in the divine intellect. That's the light by which we know all things. But then we have the passive intellect. So the passive intellect, though, is in potency. It has the ability. It gives us the ability to know anything that can be known. So through the process of abstraction, if you imagine kind of like a formless base, so to speak. I know it's not. Sometimes it's helpful in understanding a key concept to use the imagination, as long as we're careful not to use the imaginative image as our foundation for drawing new conclusions, right? So if you think of kind of like a murky, smoky, formless, like almost like a formless swamp or something, right? Just And then there's this light that pulls out of it certain ideas of things in the world that we encounter, or then of conclusions that we make. So we have a passive intellect that's in potency. It has the ability to understand all things, and it's through the light of the active intellect that a form within that passive intellect is something that's in potency, and that passive intellect is brought into act. So it comes to being right there, and now we have that being that's in our mind is the knowledge, that's the idea that we form of the thing outside of us. So we bring to act, that's what, or reduce it to act, that potency that was kind of there waiting to be activated by the active intellect. And then we have this idea that's now in our minds, whether accurate or not. We have this idea of something outside of us. So we have now that form of that outside thing in our mind in some way, right? So in here he was saying that, we have the idea of dogness that can be applied to many dogs, but then we have the idea of this or that dog, so there's more ideas there. But we can't understand all of creation or a number of different, like dog and cat, with one idea, because then it doesn't work, because they're not in the same genus. So we have, in other words, we can't, because of the limits of our intellect and understanding, we can't form a single idea. Well, there's the single idea of animal, but when you get to the species of dog or cat or dolphin, we need separate ideas for that. We do. Hence, the species are not contrary through the contrariety of the things that are outside the soul. It is in this way that when certain things that are many are considered as in any way united, they are understood together. Like when we understand dog and cat by the word animal. For the intellect understands a continuous whole all at once, not part after part. So too it understands a proposition all at once. Not first the subject and then the predicate, since it knows all the parts according to one species of the whole. From these remarks, we can infer that whenever several things are known through one species, they can be known together. But all that God knows, he knows through one species, which is his essence. Therefore, God can understand all things together. Again, a knowing power does not know anything in act unless the intention be present. Thus, the phantasms preserved in the organ are not always actually imagined because the intention is not directed to them. So a phantasm is the physical aspect, the physical representation, so to speak, the imagined image or representation of the idea that we have in our mind. So that phantasm, he's saying, can either be recalled if we have a lot of different ideas of different things. Those ideas can be recalled, but don't always have to be present to our consideration. For among voluntary agents, the appetite moves the other powers to act. We do not understand together, therefore, many things to which the intention is not directed at the same time. But things that must fall under one intention must be understood together. For he who is considering a comparison between two things directs his intention to both and sees both together. Now all the things that are in the divine knowledge must fall under one intention, for God intends to see his essence perfectly which is to see it according to its whole power, under which are contained all things. Therefore, God, by seeing his essence, sees all things together. Furthermore, the intellect of one considering successfully many things cannot have only one operation. For since operations differ according to their objects, the operation by which the first is considered must be different from the operation by which the second is considered. But the divine intellect has only one operation, namely the divine essence, as we have proven. Therefore, God considers all that he knows, not successively, meaning one after another, but together. Moreover, succession cannot be understood without time, nor time without motion, since time is the number of motion according to before and after. That's an important definition from Aristotle's physics, by the way, which you've heard me mention before. He says, since time is the number of motion according to before and after. But there can be no motion in God, as may be inferred from what we have said. There is therefore no succession in the divine operation. Thus, all that he knows, God considers together. So, we got a couple paragraphs left, but I want to pause for a second. This is a really important truth, because there's a lot of deception out there right now about timelines and this garbage about quantum, like where like things are quantumly coming into and out of existence and between parallel universes and all this. Like, okay, it's not possible. Time is simply a measurement. It's a human construct, and it's a way to measure motion. That's it. Sci-fi has leaned into our imagination and given us all these ideas of there being this possibility of parallel timelines. Well, all time is one. God's outside of time. There's one series of movements that all tie back to him. There's just before and after. I can't exist in another place and here at the same time. I can't. So there's no other timeline that I exist in that's parallel to this timeline. Because all time is, it's not these threads going through some ether, and that thread represents the passage of time in parallel universes. It doesn't make any sense. Time is merely the measure of before and after. Time is a construct in our minds by which we use, it's based on an actual observation, just like we see speed and we can measure that 90 miles an hour is faster than 60 miles an hour. That doesn't mean that there are two cars, one going 60 and one going 90. That doesn't mean that speed is also a measurement of motion, but it's a different kind of measurement of motion, right? So it's really important to understand that, because who knows what deceptions are coming. I mean, there seem to be a very heavy leaning into some of these concepts of and deception out there. And I'm not saying that anyone pushing or believing in the timeline theories is malicious or trying to deceive you or us. No, I think that it's a misunderstanding. I think it's an imaginative. What they're trying to describe is something other than what they're saying they're describing or experiencing, or that's an attempt to understand a phenomena and to describe it. Because if time is just in our minds, measuring before and after of motion, either this thing moved from there to there, or it didn't. If it moved from there to there, I have a way to describe that. it was there before and it's there after 10 minutes later. 10 minutes is the human construct that we've developed. And I mean, we know, just for example, we know that calendars, that there are moon-based calendars out there, lunar calendars, right? Where there's 13 months of 28 days. Okay. So some people still use that to count their months and to describe before and after. They still use the lunar calendar. Very few, obviously, but some do. Whereas some of us, by convention, because it works in the country we live, everybody else around us uses it. It would be futile for us and actually counterproductive for us to try to coordinate meetings and describe time differences and things like that based on the lunar calendar when everyone else around us uses the solar. So we all pretty much use the solar. The lunar calendar is a valid way to measure time and before and after. But if you use the lunar calendar and I use the solar, those aren't two different timelines. Those are two different ideas of time, two different measures of before and after. It doesn't change anything. It could change our perception of the movement we see around us and have more or less meaning. But that's all. So just be careful, because I think it's important to understand what can and cannot be. And time is an important one. But that also means if it's only a measure of time of before and after, you can't go back to before from after. I've never seen it happen. It's impossible to, movement, remember, is potency and act. So if a thing has the potency to be over there but isn't actually over there, and then something, whether it's me moving it over there or not, now I've activated the potency, and now that coffee that was potentially in me is actually in me. So the potency of that thing has been activated by an agent. Okay? This is very foundational philosophical concepts. Act always comes before potency because the agent had the power to reduce something from potency to act. So it gave act to that thing. It activated it. It actualized the ability of that coffee to be inside of me. That coffee had the potency of alerting me, clarifying my mind, waking me up. Now it's actually doing that. If that was poison, the potency would be different, right? The potency would be to harm. So once something has been actualized, you can't take it back and deactivate it. So how do you reverse motion? If motion is the act of a potency to be over here instead of over there, you can't. An egg is potentially a full chicken. Once it's a full chicken, try and put it back in that egg. Doesn't make any sense. So when you think about things in terms of act and potency, which is before and after in being, and you think of time, is a measure of motion, which is before and after in space, you can't go backwards. Now, maybe you can see forward or backwards. Just like we can take a picture of the past. I think that's much more possible to be able to see something, especially since, in some sense, time is, but like before and after is our experience. But we know that the first unmoved mover has to be out of time. So all things are present to him in this moment, as he's present to all things in the moment that they are. So in that sense, if God gives to me, because I don't have it naturally, I don't have the ability to look back in time to see when I was a toddler, struggling to take my first steps. But if God, who's outside of time, wanted to show me that and give me that imaginative image as if I was looking directly at it with my own eyes, he could do that. There's probably a way in which angels could simulate that as well, angels or demons, where they could give us an image, an imaginary image or an understanding of something that happened to us when we were a child, or something that happened to somebody in some random corner of in the Middle Ages, in some random corner of the world. Okay, that at least seems possible. Now, so I know we're going off on a little tangent here, but I think it's really important. So angels are in time as well. There's a before and after in them as well, but it's not a spatial before and after. And when I say angels, it also means demons, right? They're both intellectual creatures. That's what I mean by angel. I'm not trying to say good or bad. So these angelic beings have before and after, but it's a different way than before and after for us. Because for intellectual beings that aren't bound by matter, their before and after is their action, their interactions with us, with each other, with matter. So their before and after an action. So they can't go back in time in terms of their actions either. But they've got a solid memory, and if they can manipulate our images in our minds. And I know I'm kind of assuming some things, but these are all stuff that he talks about in different parts of later in this work. I think it's in book 2 when he talks about angelic, like intellectual substances, intellectual beings, purely intellectual. He'll talk about their powers and everything, and he talks about they have an experience of time called aveternity, which means there was a single moment when they started to be, and then they won't stop to be. They can't die like we can because there's no separation of form and matter because they're pure intellect. So it's their intellectual form is perfectly united to their being, so they're not going to die. So their actions are their before and after. So before and after for them, the passage of time for them is very different because it's just before and after in actions. But since they've been around since before the physical world was created, they've seen moments in history. They've understood moments in history. And they would know how to give men an understanding or an idea of some random event that happened in some corner of the world in the Middle Ages. They could do that. So that you could see the deception. They could make it seem like perhaps they could give someone the delusion, or they could deceive someone into thinking that they were going back in time. So, but those acts are before any interactions that they had with anything that happened back in the Middle Ages. Might be, though they might have acted on certain things, they might have influenced certain decisions, they might have helped certain people or harmed certain people, depending on what we're talking about. But those are past actions for them. They can never go back to that. Just like they can never go back to and change their mind as to whether or not to submit to God. So, very important. I think it's going to be more important in the near future to have a clear idea about this, because there seems to be a lot of deception, especially in the New Age movement, especially with people who have a New Age misunderstanding of things. I think it's going to be important to know in the future to understand that. Just like it's important to understand that we live in a biblical cosmology, not a heliocentric, empty, meaningless void. Because then you can immediately see through deceptions like the Artemis garbage, right? Which is laughable. In today's day and age, for them to only have the video quality they're releasing is absurd. Similarly, if and when a UAP appearance or invasion or interaction goes into full gear, if they attempt that deception, those who understand that the heliocentric model is not possible, the Big Bang is not possible mathematically, scientifically, philosophically, theologically, nothing. There's so many arguments that demonstrate that it's impossible. It's not just an opinion that it's impossible. It's a demonstration scientifically, mathematically, which is one of the lowest sciences, by the way. But it's compelling, and if we can show that it's mathematically impossible, then there you go. So, anyways, those truths are important, because if we're deceived and presented, if there's an attempt to deceive us and present us with some alien race that's here to save us, or two different alien races, that one is here to try to destroy us and the other's here to save us from them, or save us from ourselves, or there's someone from the future, quote unquote, who comes back in time allegedly to tell us something, it has to be garbage. It has to be garbage. It has to be a deception. This brings a lot of peace. But this is from grounded philosophical principles of the natures of things. It's not based in religion, although you could also get there by certain religious beliefs. Okay. Then, too, God's understanding is his being, as was clear from what we have said. But there is no before and after in the divine being. Everything is together, as was shown above. Neither, therefore, does the consideration of God contain a before and after, but rather understands all things together. Every intellect, furthermore, that understands one thing after the other is at one time potentially understanding, and at another time actually understanding. For while it understands the first thing, actually it understands the second. While it understands the first thing actually, it understands the second thing potentially. But the divine intellect is never potentially, but always actually understanding. Therefore, it does not understand things successively, but rather understands them together. Sacred Scripture bears witness to this, for it is written, quote, "With God there is no change nor shadow of alteration." End quote. One really beautiful reflection on this is, given that God understands all things actually in this moment, and his intention, and you could say attention, is on everything in this moment. His understanding and his intention and his focus is undividedly on each and every one of us at every single moment. We know, and we'll see it more clearly when we talk about the will of God specifically, that God has willed us each into being and loves us each and cares for us, just like in Scripture it says that he cares. He says, look, the birds of the field, the flowers of the field and the birds, they don't worry about how they're going to be provided for, or the birds don't wonder where they're going to get their food tomorrow. They know that he'll provide for them. So we ought to have the same confidence. How much more so, as Scripture says, how much more so should we trust and have confidence in God's care? But I mean, even Aristotle, and again, you might think, okay, if you don't subscribe to religion, you can still believe this. You can still understand this to be true. Because even Aristotle said that God is like a loving father, because he's the source. He's our creator. He created each one of us, kind of like a father creates his son or generates his son. So in some similar notion, it's different, obviously, God is the cause of all of us. and his attention is loving and sustaining of all of his creation. So even Aristotle almost sounds like the Gospel of Matthew sometimes, because he says that God is a loving Father that cares for each one of his children in his creation. Each one of his creation, each individual thing in his creation has his full undivided attention. Pretty incredible. So, well, I'll leave you with that for today. We went a little bit longer, but I think it was a good and important reflection. And so I do encourage you to really think about that as the deceptions seem to be growing more in number and more frequent and more subtle recently, right? We're getting more and more confusion in the masses, where people are believing such astoundingly different things about the reality around us, about the world around us. So just be careful and think it through. Think about what we just talked about. Think about what before and after is, what time is. Really ponder it and process it, so that if and when a deception comes of some time traveler from the future or some garbage that's trying to tell you, maybe you'll just be told that there isn't one God but many gods. But we know there has to be one God. We've already understood that. Scientifically, we've understood that. So something to ponder. So, all right. Well, appreciate you guys, and I look forward to tomorrow. Wish me luck today. I'm going to be doing. I took the day off work. Actually, I'm going to be doing a lot of work on the RV, prepping to move or to drive the RV cross country. So that'll be Saturday. I'll be driving. So that'll be my first time rolling off the lot here with the RV. So I'm excited about it, though. But new horizons to conquer and to explore. So, well, thank you again for being here. Don't forget to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.